Okay, we've taken the piece out of the acid, and now we've put a little flux on it, and you kind of come in close, and you can see the lines where the where the solder didn't quite take, and putting it in the acid allows the acid to kind of eat away at the surface of the metal, and you can see how clean the metal is. Okay, we got the torch fired up. We're going to come in, heat these babies up a little bit, and get that solder to flow. I like the way that the tongs have shifted just a slight bit. It's looking good. Hey, by the way, we've got sun. Look at that. Ah, sunlight crashing in the windows. This is the first time in probably a week we've seen the sun. You can see that it makes it, the despicable snow, a winter wonderland. So we've got 3 flat filed, and we're working on number 4 here. I love flat filing because it's a more hands-on approach. It gives me a more, I'm more participating in the process than, throwing it on this machine that cranks up and makes all kinds of noise. And flat filing is a much quieter, much more reasonable approach. Of course, once in a while the file gets a little contaminated, so you got to clean it out. So you can see we're just kind of bringing this edge down so that we can get rid of the silver solder and make the tongs kind of fit more evenly with the piece itself. This particular tong came loose when I was welding it. Well, when I was, fixing the back, and when I put it back, it just twisted a little bit, but I really like the twist. It kind of gives it a bit more personality than just the same, each one being exactly the same. In fact, I may just go ahead and play with that, making them all. So. All right, so now we've got the piece pretty well, all the tongs are pretty well polished up, but this surface here needs to be polished also, or ground, to get rid of the fire scale. And the fire scale is all of the red that you can see in there. So we're going to go ahead and lay this on here and grind it a little bit. And since we did grind it earlier, it's fairly flat, so we're not going to have too much trouble with it. Well, it did take a bit longer than I thought, but I probably stood there for 5 minutes grinding that down and getting it to polish up. The 2 surfaces are polished. Well, not polished, but certainly cleaned up and squared. Now we just have to come back and clean up the tongs. I like doing this prep work. It's, I don't know, there's something therapeutic about it for me. A piece that I'm working on right at the moment, which is right in between this little part here. This is where these little needle files come in really great. This is a triangular needle file, and it comes in. I'm going to put my glasses on because I can't see a thing. And we come in, and I can go ahead and trim that contact place, the edge that needs to be really clean. At least from my point of view, it needs to be clean. So I can go in there and just continue to work it and trim it until that edge gets right down to where you can get a nice clean finish. We got this baby pretty well polished up. Of course, it hasn't gotten to the buffer yet, and we still got to do some finish work on it, but all the edges are cleaned up pretty nice and clean, good sharp edges. Except we've got these 3 tongs in here that we can't get to with a file. So it's a matter of going in with a little disc sander. You can see how it works. And because the disc sander throws so much garbage as we're going, I've got to turn on the vacuum here so it will suck the particles and the dust in and keep it out of my face and out of my lungs. We'll just start it up here a little bit. All of the edges are nice and clean. All in between tongs. Everything's all fairly well cleaned up. So that's going to make us a really nice addition to that silver piece once we clean that up. I've still got to do a little bit of work on the surface here with the with some sandpaper and just really taking it down so I can get a good polish on that surface, because that surface is fairly flat and it's not going to polish well unless it's totally clean first. Now take a piece of sandpaper, put it on the flat disc, or not disc but block, and go ahead and do some sanding. You can see the coppers starting to come off onto the sandpaper. And then you can also see that the piece is really starting to I'm starting to file or sand down below all the little file marks. This is how these tongs are still a bit rough, even though I sanded them already. So I'm going to come back in with my finger and sand them. And what's going to happen is my thumb, in this case, will form around the edges of the tong, and you can see that it'll smooth out any rough angles that the sanding board created. Got everything pretty much down to a nice matte finish now. Little hand sanding. Let's bring it in close so you can see it. You can see that the surface is pretty well done. Wouldn't that be interesting? You know, not that skinny, of course, but something that would follow the same motif as the other two and give me a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and draw something right here to follow the line of that silver. Oops, hang on here. How about this? Just as a trial, just to see what it looks like, we're going to cut it out in cardboard because, of course, that's a lot less expensive. And we'll see what that looks like. That looks pretty good. Of course, you know, it is in cardboard, but once we get it kind of laid out in metal, I think we're going to have a nice balance there. Put it onto a piece of sterling and draw a line around it. We'll get a basic shape. Drop this baby on the shear, and we're going to pretty thick piece of metal, so we're going to have to pull on it fairly hard. But I think it's going to be just fine. Oops. Crashed onto the glass over there. And you can see now we have, I'm going to cut a little bit too much off there, but we can always use that metal for something else. So now we're going to go ahead and just trim it down till we get what we want. So here's kind of a cool thing. There's our original model, but then here's all the scrap that came out of that, which is very interesting. I mean, look at this piece. It's very slender and very smooth lines, twists just right. Wonderful piece. This piece isn't bad either. It's got a nice little twist to it. So that's one of the things of using that shear. You know, you could put something like together like that. Wow, cool piece. These pieces here are a little more clunky, but still have that twist quality to it that's really interesting. You just drop this in right here. And even though it's not my favorite thing to do, sometimes it's necessary. We're gonna start to saw. Okay, the basic shape's cut out. Took about 10 minutes. We've got the, it's, you know, of course rough, so we have to deal with that. But let's just see what it's going to look like over here in place. We're looking for that blank side there. Something like that kind of adds a nice little flavor to it. Someplace right around in there, I'd say. Go ahead and grind that baby. Oh, nice. A little bit more. There Okay, everything's pretty well roughed out on this. You can see that those edges are nice and smooth, fairly smooth. We'll come back in with a file later. But right now I want to dap this and get this to dome out. So let's go ahead and put the tool on it, break it over, and start pounding. It's domed. The edges are cleaned up. Let's see how it's going to lay in there. Could lay it in something like that. That wouldn't be too bad. Or more like that. I like that. Kind of sets up a three-pronged affair. All of these little inside corners in here are going to be hard to get finished. So I think I better pre-finish them before I do any welding. The flat file basically will take down the high spots and leave and fill in the low spots. Well, not fill them in, but it'll work the high spots down to the low spots and make everything kind of more even. And you can kind of see that there, can't you? A little bit more even right in that area. And again, once we've done our work with the file, and you can see that the surface is all scratched up, but it's even. So now we come back with the trusty sanding board and go ahead and take out the scratches that the file get a nice reflection off of that polished silver there up at the top. Okay, both pieces now have a reasonable polish to them. You can get the reflection off of them now. Now, since they're polished, and if we heat them up, they will get fire scale on them. So I'm going to take a mixture of boric acid and alcohol and paint it on the surface of the pieces. And what that does is that keeps the oxygen from attacking the surface of the metal while it's under the heating process. Pieces in position, that took about 15 minutes to get it in position because the third arm there has to be in the exact right angle in order for everything to match up just right. But once it's matched up, it's solid, isn't going anywhere, and I can heat that up and run those little solder joints. Can you see them? Yeah, right there. Little solder pieces, and it'll just flow right into that joint. So let's fire up the torch. We're going to go ahead and use the big torch on this one because that's a pretty big piece of metal. You can see the alcohol burning away from the boric acid. Now the boric acid at this point is turned to a white powder, which is exactly what will happen. Notice I've got one little point right in there that the boric acid pulled away. I think I'm going to put a little more acid on that, because if I don't, I'm going to have trouble. We'll get the brush out, and we'll just dip a little bit of acid onto that. There we go. Now let's see what happens when I heat it up. There it goes. Turns to pure powder. So we've got pure powder all around the whole piece. Everything's looking good. And we'll just take this thing up to temperature. And it could take a little while because it is a substantial piece of silver. My guess is in the next 30 seconds or so we're going to get a good melt going. And you can see those little pegs of silver just sticking out, the little solder just sticking out. And once they flow, then we know that everything's ready to go. So everything's starting to get a little bit dark. Notice how the metal's starting to get darker. We're up at probably 600-700 degrees right now. And at any point, see the tip's just beginning to melt there? Yeah, there we go. Now we'll just heat the bottom area up here and get it hot under the flow, and the solder will just flow right into the joint rather than trying to push it in. And just heat it up enough And that solder will flow right in. Okay, I think that we got it. Almost. A little bit more. Okay, there it is. Good. Now we'll go ahead and turn off the light so you can see that the piece, we're at about 800 degrees right now. That's good. Now we're at about 7. See, it's how it's losing its heat. It's okay.